This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Atelia Duez. Tonight's top stories. A diplomatic tit-for-tat following a clash in the South China Sea. China and the Philippines summon each other's ambassadors over the confrontation near the disputed Second Thomas Shoal. Now, that flare-up between the Chinese Coast Guard and a Philippine naval crew comes as top ASEAN diplomats gather in Manila. Bloc chair the Philippines, urging continued cooperation as a strategic necessity. And Japan voices concern after Chinese and Russian forces staged live fire drills within its exclusive economic zone. Beijing dismissed the protest as groundless. And South Korea probes a major data leak exposing tens of thousands of records, including diplomats' personal data. Authorities are not ruling out foreign state-backed hackers. Now, the South Korean president vows sweeping measures to stabilize the property market, even as he faces questions over a loan arrangement linked to his apartment sale. Also tonight, Hong Kong rolls out the welcome mat for dogs in restaurants. But viral rule breakers have some eateries backing out. Is the city truly ready to embrace pet-friendly dining? A fresh row between China and the Philippines, with both sides summoning each other's envoys following Monday's clash at the South China Sea. A tense confrontation between Beijing and Manila as Chinese Coast Guard officers ordered a Philippine boat to leave the disputed waters. Manila says that a sailor was struck on the head with a wooden baton by Chinese personnel. It also rejected Beijing's account as false and misleading, stressing that its forces acted professionally. Now, Beijing insists the Philippine Navy provoked the incident, saying it will continue carrying out what it calls law enforcement operations around the Second Thomas Shoal. Both sides are standing firmly by their versions of events. The U.S. has condemned what it called as China's dangerous actions. Well, the latest scuffle casting a shadow over the ASEAN meeting in Manila, where maritime security is among the key issues in focus. Philippine Foreign Secretary Teresa Lazaro has called for countries to work together, stressing that continued cooperation is no longer a choice, but a strategic necessity.
In the fractured global landscape, no single nation can weather these storms alone. Our strength and resilience lie in our community. Acting together, it is our shield against external pressures and our engine for regional stability.
Well, for more, we're joined now by CNA senior correspondents Leong Wai-kit in Manila and Tan Yu-guan in Shanghai. Well, first to you, Wai-kit. This scuffle here in the disputed waters simply adds another layer of diplomatic tension, it seems. So how exactly is Manila trying to balance its role as a claimant in the dispute, while also trying to steer consensus as ASEAN chair?
Well, where ASEAN chair Philippines leadership is concerned, it seems that it is on track because in recent history, no ASEAN chair had ever put its own national interests ahead of the bloc's interests. And even if they do that, there's a mechanism called the consensus safety net where everyone's opinions are all weighed. That's on the leadership front for Philippines as ASEAN chair. On the national front, things get a bit tricky because earlier you mentioned, Oteli, that this is about the Philippines and China. Both have also summoned their diplomats, the envoys. And you've also mentioned that the US had weighed in. Australia, in fact, had also weighed in, both standing behind the Philippines, calling out China's aggression. So it will be very tricky for these countries to meet this week in Manila here. But ASEAN as a platform allows these parties face time to knock things out behind closed doors, to at least have conversations. So that's on the talking front. On the action front, it gives them more impetus to speed up talks on the code of conduct, and at the same time, try other tools such as your ASEAN Coast Guard Forum, such as your ASEAN Maritime Center, which is said to be set up in the Philippines. And all these will help to manage your maritime developments in the region.
Now let's bring Yuan into the conversation now. We know that Beijing has summoned the Philippine ambassador, basically accusing Manila of provocation. But how is China framing this confrontation? And also, what message is it sending just a day ahead of its meeting with ASEAN foreign ministers?
Well, aside from framing this as provocation, it's also framing this as a challenge to what it calls its sovereignty claim over what China calls the Ren Ai Reef. Now, at the center of the dispute is the Philippine Navy ship that Manila, China claims, deliberately grounded there in 1999. Now, the Philippines have kept troops on board ever since and used it as a military outpost and resupplying them by boat. China says that presence is illegal. It says that Manila promised to remove the ship but has failed to do so for 27 years. Beijing also says that under a temporary arrangement reached in 2024, the Philippines must notify China before humanitarian resupply missions, and with the supply subjects to what China calls on-site verification. Beijing says this is meant to prevent Manila from reinforcing the ship or turning it into a permanent outpost. Now, Beijing's account of Monday's confrontation is that two Philippine boats deployed from the ship approached and rammed Chinese Coast Guard vessels before Philippine personnel attacked Chinese officers. Now, China says it has no choice but to respond and has warned Manila to restrain its frontline personnel or bear the consequences. Now, one detail is quite striking. Let's play the phone video and look at it carefully. Now, the footage appears to show personnel from both sides striking at each other with oars and sticks. These are uniformed and potentially armed forces, yet neither side appears to have used firearms. So what we can see here is force being used, but apparently no heavy guns were raised or used. At today's regular foreign ministry briefing, Beijing also sent a broader message ahead of the ASEAN meeting. The ministry said that regional forums should not be used to discuss bilateral maritime disputes. It also warned the Philippines, as ASEAN chair, not to put its own political interests above regional peace and stability. The spokesperson also said that certain forces tend to stir up maritime issues whenever important regional diplomacy is taking place, and asked who was behind it. So Beijing's message is that it will not back down at sea, and it does not want Manila to internationalize this bilateral dispute through ASEAN.
Okay, so let's put aside the maritime disputes for a bit now and Waikit. So beyond all of that, tell us what else stood out from today's ASEAN foreign ministers meeting.
Yeah, earlier in the day, the ASEAN foreign ministers issued a statement on the Middle East situation, expressing serious concern, calling all parties to refrain and go into dialogue. The second update is, in fact, just moments ago, I stepped out from a briefing by Secretary Lazaro. It was about Myanmar. Two things stood out for me. One, it was the way Secretary Lazaro referred to Myanmar's Tim Nang Sui. This is how she said it. When we met Myanmar's foreign minister, with the air quotes. And this is in line with how the Philippines, and as ASEAN chair, views the current Myanmar administration, that it still does not recognize the Min Aung Hlaing-led administration. The second thing that stood out to me was that the 5-point consensus is still valid. I make this a point because recently the Myanmar parliament had passed a motion to officially reject the 5-point consensus, saying that it no longer reflects the political situation on the ground. Earlier, though, Secretary Lazaro said that Tin Maung Sui had denied it, had rejected it, and therefore the 5-point consensus still exists. So Secretary Lazaro says that despite the parliament resolution, that has been negated.
Many thanks for that report. CNA senior correspondents Leong Wai-kit in Manila and Tan Yuan in Shanghai. Now, as ASEAN balances the growing geopolitical rivalry between the U.S. and China, all while maintaining its own neutrality. Well, we'll be speaking with an expert a little later this hour on the challenges ahead for the Southeast Asian bloc. Now, Japan says that Chinese and Russian naval forces have conducted a joint live-firing exercise within its exclusive economic zone. Defense officials say a Chinese missile destroyer carried out the exercise about 180 kilometers southwest of Okinotori Island on Sunday. Now, Japan's Navy spotted it hours before, operating alongside 2 other Chinese warships and a Russian frigate. Tokyo added that its destroyer monitored the fleet and gathered intelligence on their activities. They've also raised formal diplomatic concerns over maritime safety. China disputes Japan's EEZ claims around Okinotori, arguing that Tokyo is not entitled to do so, since it's a reef rather than an island.
中ロ両国は先月には爆撃機の共同飛行を実施したほか、今月上旬には両国海軍が共同演習を実施するなど、軍事面での連携を強化しています。今回の共同航行についても、両軍の軍事面での連携強化に向けた動きの一環であると認識をしており、海上自衛隊の艦艇及び航空機により適切に警戒監視、情報収集を実施しているところです。
Well, South Korea is investigating a cyber attack on a government-run diplomatic academy after its foreign ministry said that a significant amount of data may have been exposed. The announcement came a day after the ministry revealed that unidentified attackers exploited a previously unknown software flaw to breach the Korean National Diplomatic Academy's online education system. Well, the hackers gained control of a server between April and May 2025 and maintained access until February this year, when a suspicious activity was detected and the system was shut down. No misuse of leaked data had been confirmed. The platform stored training videos and course administration records, including names and user IDs of participants. Now, local media said that information of about 6,000 current and former diplomats may have been compromised. Authorities are still determining the full extent of the leak, saying there is not yet enough technical evidence to identify those responsible. But they have not ruled out foreign state-backed hacking groups, including the possibility of a North Korean link. Now, a UN report finds that victims of transnational online scam across the Asia-Pacific have lost more than $114 billion in 2025 alone. Now, that's triple the losses recorded in 2023. Now, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime says that the numbers reflect the scaling of the industry, adding that the ecosystem is rapidly evolving to stay ahead of law enforcement. Now, the UN report has also confirmed that criminal syndicates of Chinese origin remain the primary force behind the cyber-enabled scam economy in the Asia-Pacific. People from at least 80 countries and territories have been found in scam compounds across the region, as recruitment networks use transit hubs in Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. Well, the UNODC also warned that groups no longer stay within their own geographic domain and specialty and are now operating across multiple illicit markets while using shared devices or other services. The report added that syndicates are outpacing crackdowns, using AI systems to boost criminal activity to recruit victims, conduct social engineering campaigns, and cryptocurrency theft. The UNODC says that pressure from law enforcement in the region has displaced but not dismantled operations. And that's because groups relocate from countries like Myanmar and Laos to East Timor, Pacific Island states, and parts of Africa. Well, the report also points to corruption as a primary enabler of tech-driven organized crime in the region. Well, coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Roland Lim will be joining us with the business desk. So, Roland, China apparently said to be weighing export controls on AI technologies.
That's right, Beijing reportedly in talks with companies on measures that, if adopted, could be the country's biggest such restrictions in years. Plus, Japan's government finalizes its annual economic blueprint with clarifications made on the central bank's independence, but worries remain on funding. Welcome back. You're watching East Asia Tonight. Time for your business news. A South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has promised measures to stabilize the country's property market on both the supply and demand side. He made the remarks at a cabinet meeting and called windfall profits from real estate the biggest culprit in destroying fairness. Although Mr. Lee is facing questions as well about the sale of his apartment. Now, he sold it in an attempt to set an example in support of his administration's housing policies. But it has brought homebuyers' financing constraints into the spotlight. A tighter mortgage regulation to cool rallies in property prices have sharply reduced the amount prospective homebuyers can borrow from banks. To get into the details, CNA's Grace Shin joins us in the studio. Grace, good to have you on the show. Surging home prices in South Korea has been one of its biggest economic headaches. Why is this problem so persistent, and what is President Lee trying to do about it?
You're right. Housing has dominated South Korean politics for a while, actually more than a decade, because it's become increasingly unaffordable to purchase houses, especially in the capital Seoul, but the greater Seoul area, including in Gyeonggi-do province, because in the capital Seoul alone, the median apartment price now costs around $850,000. Now, that's roughly 14 times the average annual income, putting home ownership out of hands for many young owners. And owning a home in South Korea has some strong social context to it because it's a major milestone for many young couples. It's the beginning step for them to get married and start a family. And that's led to what's known as yeongger in Korean, which is short for the Korean phrase meaning to scrap together everything, even your soul. And in practice, it means borrowing as much as possible through mortgages, personal loans, and family money just to buy a home. And another practice is called gap investment, kiptu in Korean, where investors buy homes with very little of their own money by relying on Korea's unique jeonse rental system. And what that is instead of paying monthly rent, tenants put down a large refundable deposit, which is often 50 to 80% of the home's value, which is then returned once they move out. And using that, investors can use that deposit to finance most of their purchases, allowing them to buy multiple properties with relatively little cash. And critics say that that type of gap investment has fueled speculation and speculative buying, contributing to rising house prices. And that's why every government, whether they be conservative or liberal, they've tried to make bringing down house prices a priority. They've tried building more homes, raising taxes on multiple homeowners, even cracking down on speculation and tightening lending rules. Now, but I want to make sure that the Lee administration is different in the sense that they've made restricting mortgage lending the centerpiece of their housing policy. So Lee's government has introduced some of the toughest borrowing restrictions in years by sharply limiting how much buyers can borrow from banks for expensive homes, trying to alleviate the housing crisis, especially in Seoul.
And these tougher borrowing rules have also sparked criticisms, especially from younger buyers trying to climb the property ladder. And now President Lee himself also facing the backlash over the sale of his property.
Right. Before we go into the Lee controversy, we also have to understand that in Korea, a lot of youngsters want to start their marriage and life in Seoul because most of them work there. It's very densely populated. That's where all the workplaces are at and a lot of the entertainment facilities. Now moving on to Lee, the criticism right now is that the president seems to have benefited from a financing arrangement that ordinary buyers can't easily get their hands on. And it's called seller financing. Recently, he sold his apartment in the greater Seoul area for about $2 million, and the buyers only had to pay 40% upfront. Instead, Lee and his wife effectively became the lenders themselves, allowing the buyers to defer payment of the remaining 60% rather than having to go to the banks. But the issue is that Lee's own government has made it much harder for people to borrow at the banks, right? So buyers of expensive homes are limited to bank mortgages of just around $135,000. So critics say the buyers were therefore able to get around the spirit of Lee's lending regulations by borrowing directly from the seller instead, which is not that common. And the opposition People Power Party says that undermines the credibility of Lee's signature housing policy. They've accused him of hypocrisy. On some fronts, there's even saying that he needs to be impeached for all of this. But Lee's office has rejected everything, saying that the seller financing is an entirely legal concept and that President Lee did set an example by selling the apartment at a lower market value to demonstrate his commitment in stabilizing the housing market. So politically, this has become one of Lee's first major controversies. There are no allegations that the transactions have been illegal, and Lee's Democratic Party does comfortably control parliament. So it's too early to say that impeachment is on the table, but politically, the story is unlikely to disappear anytime soon because housing isn't just an economic problem in South Korea. It represents wealth, social mobility, and the prospect of building a future. So when the president appears to have used a financing arrangement that most ordinary buyers cannot access, it does raise questions about fairness, even though it was perfectly legal.
So it does sound like Seoul's property crisis still lots of ideas, but no solutions.
Definitely. We'll have to see what happens.
Grace, appreciate those insights. That was our very own Grace Shin. Now, China is reportedly weighing tighter export controls on its AI and semiconductor technologies. Experts say the step reflects Beijing's push to keep domestic at home, that's AI at home, and to show that China, like the US, now sees advanced AI as a critical national asset requiring controls. The Financial Times reports that Chinese regulators are consulting domestic AI and chip firms on ways to stop advanced technology and key startups from falling into Western hands. The Ministry of Commerce has asked companies including Alibaba, ByteDance, and Zhipu for views on limiting the transfer of AI training data overseas and restricting foreign users from downloading their AI model weights. The ministry is also considering curbs that would stop overseas chip makers, including Qualcomm and TSMC, from producing advanced chips based on designs from Chinese firms such as Huawei. Other proposals include tighter controls on foreign acquisitions of strategic technology companies, including those developing agentic AI. Now, if adopted, the measures would mark China's biggest technology export restrictions in years. Regulators are now reviewing industry feedback before making a final decision. Other business news on our radar. A Chinese AI startup, Moonshot AI, has temporarily stopped new subscriptions, saying overwhelming demand for its new Kimi K3 model has swamped its server capacity. Existing paid members remain unaffected. Now, Kimi K3 is currently the world's largest open-weight AI model. The infrastructure strain comes as Moonshot seeks up to $2 billion in fresh funding ahead of a potential Hong Kong IPO. South Korea's exports extended robust growth in early July as artificial intelligence-driven demand for semiconductors continued to fuel the economy. Outbound shipments in the first 20 days of July rose 52% from a year earlier to about $55 billion. Imports went up 20% on year to $43 billion, resulting in a trade surplus of around $12 billion. The EU has slapped Chinese e-commerce giant AliExpress with a record fine of nearly $630 million. Now, it's citing failure to stop illegal, unsafe, and counterfeit products from being sold on its platform. EU regulators say dangerous cosmetics and unsafe toys remained available for weeks. AliExpress says the fine is disproportionate and will appeal. It has less than 3 months to propose corrective measures. Japan's cabinet has approved Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's first annual economic blueprint. The finalized version includes classifications on the central bank's independence after an earlier draft raised worries that the government could influence monetary policy. A reference to a clause in a law emphasizing the need to protect the Bank of Japan's independence setting policy, that is, has been added in a footnote. But the document retained language urging the BOJ to conduct itself, quote, appropriately to see stable price rises. The annual blueprint also makes no clear mention of fiscal consolidation. That's a phrase included in the previous plan compiled under Ms. Takaichi's predecessor. The Prime Minister's economic blueprint calls for aggressive spending in strategic areas to boost the economy and outlines ways to secure funding. But concerns remain over how the government can go about it without straining the country's finances, as Japan has one of the highest debt burdens among advanced economies. And coming up on East Asia Tonight, calls for unity as ASEAN top diplomats meet in Manila. Telly Edwards will be speaking with an expert on the challenges ahead for the bloc amid fresh confrontation in the South China Sea and the resumption of all-out war in the Middle East. Plus, Japan wilts under a scorching heat wave with health warnings issued to 42 out of the country's 47 prefectures.
Hello again, this is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Japan raises safety concerns over joint live-fire drills by China and Russia within its exclusive economic zone. Beijing dismisses Tokyo's protest as groundless. Now, China and the Philippines summon each other's ambassadors after a confrontation near a disputed shoal in the South China Sea. And ASEAN chair, the Philippines, calls continued cooperation a strategic necessity amid growing global challenges as top diplomats gather in Manila, including from the US, China, and Russia. Maritime security and South China Sea tensions expected to feature in discussions among ASEAN foreign ministers and their dialogue partners. Well, it comes after the latest confrontation between China and the Philippines in a disputed second Thomas Shoal yesterday. Now, the bloc gathering as the region seeks to balance ties with both powers while advancing negotiations on a code of conduct for the disputed waters. Now, for more analysis, we've got Professor Lim Tai Wei of Soka University joining us live all the way from Tokyo. Thanks, Prof, for joining us this evening. Let's just talk about what everyone is probably watching out for, which is the top American and Chinese diplomats they're expected to meet. Firstly, how significant is this and what's at stake for both sides?
Well, ASEAN meetings, particularly with dialogue partners, has always afforded great powers corridor diplomacy, in which they can meet each other to have informal chats away from the glare of the media. And this time, it is not an exception because it is an opportune moment where the top diplomats of the two superpowers are in the same place at the same time. So they are quite likely to continue the momentum that was set by the last meeting in Beijing when President Trump met with President Xi. There appears to be a reset and stabilization of a relationship between the two superpowers. This is likely to continue between the two top diplomats representing their respective countries because there has been talk that there will be a second visit, perhaps to Shenzhen, the unofficial Silicon Valley of China, sometime later this year, and also a visit by President Xi from Beijing to Washington, D.C. So we are quite likely to see this kind of interactions continue, and therefore, for these interactions to continue, positive, optics must be maintained. Therefore, it is unlikely that we'll see, significant clashes. The two diplomats will probably try to shore up the details or support of the upcoming visits by Chinese president to the US and the second visit by US president to China.
But however, the backdrop to those talks seem far from ideal because we've got Washington condemning China's South China Sea actions in pretty strong terms ahead of this meeting. I mean, does that or will that change the tone or the substance of talks?
Well, stabilization of relationship means that there's also a recognition of the differences that they have to agree to disagree. And we're quite likely to see that these will still be mentioned, but mentioned in a way that will not derail the major sort of a stabilization of a relationship between the two superpowers in order for the visits as well as communications between China and the US to continue. So Secretary of State Marco Rubio is likely to mention some issues that is in U.S. interest, while Foreign Minister, Director of Foreign Relations in China, Wang Yi, will also be mentioning some of the things and items that are in the Chinese national interest. But overall, the atmospherics will be, such that it does not derail their leaders from meeting each other in the upcoming visits.
Right, and Professor, let's just turn to China's broader agenda here. They have to manage tensions with the US, but broadly, what is Beijing's priorities in Southeast Asia?
Well, I think the sort of pressing issue is energy. And we are seeing the restart of kinetic warfare in the Straits of Hormuz, and also the announcement by the Houthis that they will blockade Saudi Arabia. So this is creating great concerns because the big powers the big economic powers in East Asia, China, Japan, and Korea, they are all net energy importer, particularly fossil fuels from the Middle East. So and this has also concerned Southeast Asia, which is developing its manufacturing capabilities. That also requires energy, even though some of them may have their own energy resources, but they remain concerned about the price of oil, for example, whose turbulence in the price of oil that's been caused by the kinetic conflicts in the Middle East. So it is quite likely that China will discuss this very pressing issue with Southeast Asia, and Southeast Asia itself has plans to set up oil exchange stockpiles. In fact, South Korea and Japan have already started their plans for their joint oil stockpile exchange. So we are quite likely to see energy to be on the top of the agenda, particularly the urgency in which they need to sort of make arrangements for alternative energies. For example, Indonesia, a couple of days ago, has announced that they are willing to and happy to work with China on solar panels and solar energy generation, and also other kinds of alternatives that can sort of mitigate the issues that's happening in the Middle East.
And Prof, we've also got the Quad foreign ministers. They're also meeting on the sidelines. What should we be looking out for?
Well, earlier on, there had been some concern that the Quad hadn't met for some time, but that concern sort of dissipated when they were able to meet quite recently. And so we're quite likely to see that perhaps Secretary of State Marco Rubio will reassure its allies and alignees in the Quad that the US is very much committed to Indo-Pacific region, even though it is now engaged in a major event and activities in the Middle East. The Quad is likely to see greater alignments in some areas in which they have common challenges. Perhaps energy might be one of them, but the main sort of symbolic value of the Quad meeting is that to reassure the Quad members that the US is still very much engaged in the Quad, bearing in mind that when Secretary of State Marco Rubio first became the secretary, his very first meeting was actually meeting with the foreign ministers of the Quad.
All right, many thanks for speaking to us on Indo-Pacific security, Professor Lim Tai Wei, Soka University, chatting with us all the way from Tokyo. Now, China and Thailand have pledged closer cooperation on artificial intelligence and trade as Prime Minister Anutin Charnvirakul held talks with his counterpart Li Qiang in Beijing. Now, they also agreed to strengthen defense ties, intelligence sharing, and joint efforts to combat online scams. Now, Thailand has vowed to create a safer environment for Chinese tourists and enterprises while stepping up its crackdown on cross-border crime. There is a wider regional push to dismantle scam centers operating across Southeast Asia, particularly in Myanmar and Cambodia. But Thailand also reaffirmed its target of completing the first phase of its high-speed rail link to China by 2030. The Bangkok-Nakhon Ratchasima line will eventually connect with Laos, forming a wider rail network linking Kunming in southwestern China to Singapore. But it was a lighter moment that captured attention online. Mr. Anutin there took to the microphone to sing a classic love song made famous by music legend Teresa Teng during a formal luncheon hosted by Premier Lee. Well, the performance has since gone viral, and it follows another musical moment earlier this month when Mr. Anutin played the saxophone as Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim sang. And during a visit to Hanoi in June, Mr. Anutin joined local musicians playing a Vietnamese instrument in front of Prime Minister Lee Min Hong. Japanese authorities are urging caution against heat stroke, warning that temperatures in some areas of the country could reach dangerous levels. Heat stroke alerts have been issued for 42 out of 47 of the country's prefectures. Koshu City in Yamanashi Prefecture saw a daytime high of 39.4 degrees Celsius yesterday. A scorching heat also recorded from the northeast region of Tohoku to Kyushu in the southwest. Officials expect temperatures to rise again today. Now, over in Hiroshima, animals are also struggling with the heat, as you can see. Some zoos are bringing out special treats just to cool them down, including distributing chilled slices of watermelon. Well, meanwhile, in South Korea, torrential downpours are expected to persist in the country's central region. Heavy rain has already lashed parts of the capital region early today, with 58 millimeters of rain falling in just 1 hour in Incheon. Downpours are forecast to subside in the Seoul metropolitan area overnight. Authorities say monsoon rains in the southern region are also set to ease. Meanwhile, officials have issued a flood advisory for the Imjin River near the border with North Korea. Water levels had risen sharply due to heavy downpours, with Pyongyang also releasing water from a dam without prior notice. Officials have sent mobile safety warnings to residents and visitors in the area, urging them to stay away from the rivers. And we have more extreme weather coverage on CNA's TikTok channel. Parts of China under heavy rain alerts as a sprawling rain belt sweeps across the country. This clip shows the extent of the floods triggered by the torrential downpours in Shanghai's Yangpu district, one of the worst affected. Drainage systems were overwhelmed, leaving roads submerged and several underground areas underwater. More than 70,000 emergency personnel have been mobilized amid evacuations. Meanwhile, a rare funnel cloud was spotted over Ningbo in eastern China's Zhejiang province. Residents saw the thin tornado-like column yesterday afternoon as severe thunderstorms moved across the city. Authorities say the rotating funnel formed beneath a thunderstorm but never touched the ground. It lasted about 3 minutes and no major damage was reported. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, why Hong Kong is facing a backlash over a dog-friendly dining scheme, with eateries pulling out of the initiative. And a Japanese man makes history again, this time by taking maternity leave. Good to have your company on East Asia Tonight. So, Hong Kong started allowing dogs inside about 1,000 approved restaurants just this month. But complaints have come in the first weeks of the new scheme, with some eateries backing out. Well, we've got videos and photos of dogs breaking the rules have gone viral, like this one at a pup licking a restaurant plate. They are at the center of an online debate about whether Hong Kong is ready for pet-friendly dining. City authorities launched a scheme this year to boost the city's struggling food and beverage industry, but consumers are crossing the border for cheaper meals on the mainland, and restaurant earnings have not returned to post-COVID levels. Well, for more on this, we've got CNA's Geraldine Yap. She joins us live from Hong Kong. So, Jerry, seeing a dog licking a plate is pretty nasty, I have to say. But tell us what else. What else are people saying that's causing the backlash?
Now, we've seen a wide range of comments online, especially in response to some of these photos and videos. One comment is saying that the sight of fur flying around and the smell of dogs is making him lose his appetite. Some other comments have also criticized dog owners for not ensuring that their dogs behave properly. Now, we've also come across at least 2 groups online compiling lists of dog-friendly restaurants to boycott. And one of them is titled, "I will not visit dog-friendly restaurants again." Now, but of course, others have also posted to say that they have observed the dogs to be quite well behaved. The government says that it has received around 20 complaints so far. Most of these involve minor issues such as the length of the dog's leash and also seating arrangements inside the eateries. And officers have also been going around to inspect the restaurants and also to just ensure that everything is being implemented smoothly. Now, I spoke to a cafe owner who told me that so far he hasn't had any issues with misbehaving dogs. And of course, they also do take steps to ensure that there is no conflict between the dog owners and other patrons. So, for example, if patrons come without dogs, staff will ask them if they're okay with being next to dogs. And if they're not okay, then they will be separated from the patrons that come with dogs. But of course, the cafe owner acknowledges that not all restaurants are equally well equipped to allow dogs inside. And here's what he had to say.
有啲食肆咧，其實真係唔適合俾動物或者寵物入去，因為第一個 size 好細啦，個面積好細啦。第二就係佢哋本身係做開類似茶餐廳啦，甚至乎酒樓啦。咁其實係咪真係可以容許到佢入去咧？點解咁多人申請呢個牌照？因為好多人都希望藉住呢個牌照嚟到增加佢生意啦。因為而家香港個生意或者係做生意經營環境都好難。
Now, according to the latest update from the government, 11 restaurants have pulled out from the scheme so far. And we understand that the licenses that they give up will go to other eateries that are currently on the waiting list. And of course, there is a significant number of businesses on this list because there were over 2,000 applicants vying for the initial quota of 1,000 permits.
Okay, so even though nearly a dozen of these establishments backed out, what does this all mean for the future of pet-friendly dining in Hong Kong?
Now, the government and lawmakers and even the restaurant operators themselves, they say that the pullouts are not necessarily a bad thing. It shows that these restaurants themselves know that they're not equipped to allow dogs inside and they are doing the responsible thing by withdrawing from the scheme. The backlash online, of course, is sparking a wider discussion about responsible pet ownership in Hong Kong. And it comes at a time when the city is trying to become more pet-friendly. So, for example, some public transport operators are allowing pets on board selected bus and train services. And there are actually also a lot of pet-friendly malls in the city. Now, according to government statistics, there are more than 240,000 households in Hong Kong that own over 400,000 cats and dogs as pets. And one lawmaker tells me that he feels that instead of educating people who don't like dogs to be more accepting of dogs, the onus should actually be on the restaurant operators and in particular the dog owners themselves to ensure that the dog-friendly restaurant scheme is implemented properly and is not being abused.
I think that it's a positive discussion overall to have an alarm towards sort of, okay, if I want more, as a pet owner, if I want more pet-friendly policy, if I want more pet-friendly establishments, etc., me as pet owner, one of the participants, one of the benefactors of the policy needs to behave, needs to not be a bad example. If I take this for granted and exploit everything that is inside just because I can let my dog into the establishment, guess what? It's going to go away.
Now, the government says that overall they think that the scheme is still on track and heading in the right direction, and they do expect to open a second round of applications for permits in about 6 months.
Well, I guess time will tell. Well, thanks so very much for that report. CNA's Geraldine Yap speaking to us live from Hong Kong. Now, a mayor of a small Japanese city has become the first in the country to take maternity leave. The move has drawn some criticism, while also putting the spotlight on issues like falling birth rates and gender equality.
Shoko Kawata is about to make history for a second time. She's in charge of a small Japanese town just outside of Osaka and will become the country's first sitting mayor to take maternity leave. Kawata first made headlines almost 3 years ago when she became Japan's youngest female mayor, and she's continuing to trailblaze. While 16 weeks maternity leave is guaranteed for Yawata city employees, there's no such option or protocol for the mayoral position. So Kawata created it for herself, has appointed a replacement, and plans to take the full 16 weeks leave.
市長で初めてというのは私自身もとても驚いているところです。やっぱりこれまでそれだけ、若い女性であったりというのがやはり市長になる機会というのがなかったんだなというふうに感じているところです。でこういった産休取得というふうに、厳密に言うと制度的にはですね産休というものがございませんので。
Kawata adds that she has received criticism for her decision. On the streets of Yawata for the city's Taiko Festival, there are mixed views as Kawata attends one of her last functions. Well, this man says he thinks it's impressive, proactive and progressive. This woman believes the mayor shouldn't be on full pay while on leave, despite saying she should have time to recover from the birth. In October of last year, Sanae Takaichi became Japan's first female prime minister, but politics and leadership roles still remain male-dominated environments. Japan ranks 118 out of 148 countries in the World Economic Forum's most recent gender gap report.
男女共同参画とか働き方改革とかいろいろなことが言われていますけれども、やっぱりリーダーを含めたですねさまざまな職業において子供を産むということをやはりためらわない社会を作っていかなければ、やはり少子化というのは少子化によるやっぱり人口減少、それに伴う経済の劣化というのは私は避けられないというふうに思っています。
Japanese women are legally entitled to claim around 14 weeks of maternity leave and are typically paid about 2/3 of their wages and a birth bonus.
Now, football's world governing body, FIFA, has launched an investigation into that post-match brawl that erupted after the World Cup final. Well, if you recall, video captured several players involved in the confrontation as tensions boiled over, moments after Spain secured their second World Cup title. Argentina midfielder Leandro Paredes appeared to grab Spain defender Eric Garcia by the throat before shoving Spain substitute Gavi to the ground as he tried to break up the melee. Argentinian defender Nahuel Molina also appeared to strike Spanish captain Rodri in the stomach. Well, despite all of that, the team were welcomed back to the capital, Buenos Aires, by grateful fans.
Y estoy muy orgullosa de esta selección que dio todo y que son campeones. Para el pueblo argentino, Argentina es campeón.
Many had come out in support for talisman Lionel Messi, who did not return to Argentina, heading to Florida instead, where he plays for Inter Miami. Head coach Lionel Scaloni said in a tearful interview that the team would need a rebuild.
Estar en ese lugar. Entonces, para seguir... se necesitan un montón de cosas, sobre todo volver a resetearse, volver a formar un grupo como este. Que difícilmente se vuelve a formar y me duele el alma. Lo siento.
Contrasting emotions in Spain, where the world champions were given a royal reception by the king and also met the Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez. The team were greeted by huge crowds in the capital, Madrid. Close to 2 million supporters came out for the open-top bus victory parade, bathing the city in a sea of the team's colors of red and yellow to celebrate the world champs. And that does it for Tuesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at CNA.Asia. Thanks for watching.